everybody, it's Harvard Lawyer Lee. Well, I'm putting in this little introduction to the video to explain to you that while I was finishing up the editing for the video you're about to see, Judge Azcarate ruled. Amber Heard had filed a motion for new trial or to set aside the verdict that was rendered against her. Johnny Depp's team responded. I've already unpacked Amber Heard's motion, and this video is about Johnny Depp's team's response, what they said in response to Amber Heard's arguments. But Judge Azcarate ruled so fast that she got her order out before I could even get the video out. Judge Azcarate's order, which was quite short, ruled against Amber Heard in every regard as to all 6 arguments that you're going to see unpacked here, and as to a 7th, which I had already addressed in a separate video. That 7th one related to the supposed fake juror, the juror who was not the actual person called for jury duty, according to Amber's briefing. I had several reasons that I wanted to go ahead and drop this video. The first is that it's very difficult to understand Judge Azcarate's ruling if you don't understand the underpinnings, the why behind what she was ruling. Then the second reason I wanted to do it is because the arguments that you see here are going to be the same arguments you see on appeal, almost surely. The arguments Amber Heard made will carry through. The argument that Johnny Depp makes will carry through. So it's worth looking at that. And it's worth understanding those arguments because you're going to see them again, because they're going to be important. And then the third reason was that I had a lot of people ask me questions about the things that Johnny Depp argued. It's difficult to understand. This is something that is more legal than, say, a trial or than an examination of a witness. So it's easier to understand if you have somebody talk you through it. And that's why I wanted to do it. So on to the video. Well, here it is. Johnny Depp's response to Amber Heard's motion to set aside the verdict or for a new trial. Johnny Depp's team is responding to her motion. Now, I have a video on what she argued. I'll link that at the end. This is about the response by Johnny Depp's team. There were 6 primary arguments plus 1 about the juror. I also did a separate video about the infamous juror number 15. I want to talk about the other 6 arguments. And you should know right off the bat 2 things about the motions that I'm going to be talking about and have talked about. First of all, what we're seeing right now is a preview of what we're going to see on appeal. The second thing is that it's very hard to win a motion for a new trial or to set aside a verdict. The reason is a couple. One is that just practically, the judge has just been through a 6-week trial and she ruled the best way she knew how. The chances that she's going to say, oh yeah, that's right, I made a mistake, let's start over, are very small. And then the second thing is that the law actually supports her in making a decision like that. Under Virginia law, a verdict is not to be set aside unless it is plainly wrong or without evidence to support it. Now, the first argument that Amber Heard made was that the damages were excessive and they weren't supported by the evidence. Johnny Depp's team comes back saying, Judge, you cannot set aside a verdict unless it's so excessive as to shock the conscience of the court, which a $10 million verdict is frankly not very likely to do. And then they also say, look, you have to look at all the evidence in the light most favorable to us, to Johnny Depp, because we won the trial, because we won that verdict. They talk about 4 different things as they go through the damages. The first was they say, look, we not only presented evidence of damages, we presented a lot of evidence of damages. They go through the testimony of Jack Wiggum, Johnny Depp's manager, who said, if you'll recall, that in 2017, even though Amber Heard had already made her allegations in the divorce proceeding and the temporary restraining order had been obtained, Johnny Depp was still clicking. He was filming. He had numerous studio films. He made a lot of money that year. He took 2018 off because he was specifically going to take a half year off and then perform with his band for half a year. But then he was planning to get right back to films. That was the period in which Amber Heard's op-ed came out, and he lost the ability. He could no longer get any studio films. And one of the things that Wiggum said was it wasn't just that he couldn't get studio films. Wiggum said that he had negotiated a deal for Johnny Depp to do Pirates of the Caribbean 6 and be paid $22.5 million for it. But because the op-ed came out, The opportunity was lost. Johnny didn't get to do that. Michael Spindler, an expert in forensic accounting, totaled all of the damages up and concluded that Johnny Depp had lost $40.3 million because of the films he couldn't do. That was lost incomes from Pirate 6 and from other potential projects. So they say we have plenty of evidence. And also they say, even if we didn't actually have to prove any damages, even though we did do that, because damages are presumed where you prove defamation per se. The jury could come up with an amount that was reasonable. We didn't even have to put in any amount, even though we did. The third thing that Johnny Depp's team argues is that the jury clearly took into account all of the other things that Amber Heard is saying they left out. Amber Heard says, look, there were other things that could have damaged and did damage Johnny Depp's reputation. There was drinking and drug use. There was the Sun article calling him a wife beater. And I'm not responsible for that, Judge. But Johnny Depp's team says, look, we put up an expert who said that there were $40.3 million in damages, and yet the jury only awarded $10 million. Clearly, the jury did take into account Amber Heard's arguments, and that's why they reduced the amount. Now, the fourth argument that Johnny Depp's team makes about damages is a response to Amber Heard's claim that Johnny Depp's team talked repeatedly about the period of time before the op-ed came out. They did repeatedly say it was 6 years that he had been through this. He had been fighting this for 6 years. He had been trying to get his reputation back for 6 years. Frankly, it may have been inadvisable for Johnny Depp's team to have made those arguments. But they came up with their response, and I think in the end it will be a winner in this area. And here's what they say. All we were doing was providing necessary context for the jury so they could understand what the issue was. Secondly, at no point did we ask the jury to give damages for that. We didn't say award us damages before the op-ed. And the jury instructions, and here's the clincher, I think, the jury instructions were explicit that the damages had to be caused by the defamatory statements. They also said their experts limited the numbers they gave to that shorter period of time. So I think in the end that they will probably prevail on that. They also make a small argument in a footnote that the Amber Heard team waived some of the arguments. They could have objected during opening and closing when Johnny Depp's team referred to 6 years of fighting it, and they didn't. And therefore they waived some of those objections. The reasoning for that, the idea behind that, is that if you don't make your objection at trial, the judge can't rule on it. So it's not permitted for you to make your objection later. Now, the second big argument by Amber Heard was that the verdicts on the complaint and her counterclaim were inconsistent, that it was impossible that the jury could find that Johnny was owed $10 million and she was owed $2 million. That was inconsistent, and the law won't allow an inconsistent verdict. In my opinion, that's a very poor argument by Amber Heard's team. This is simply not an inconsistent verdict, and I think that Johnny Depp's team hit that appropriately and hard. The issue that Amber Heard won on was very specific. Here's what she won on. This one statement made by Adam Waldman, Johnny Depp's attorney. Quite simply, this was an ambush, a hoax. They set Mr. Depp up by calling the cops, but the first attempt did not do the trick. The officers came to the penthouses, thoroughly searched and interviewed, and left after seeing no damage to face or property. So Amber and her friends spilled a little wine and roughed the place up, got their story straight under the direction of a lawyer and publicist, and then placed a second call to 911. Johnny Depp's team says, look, there are a lot of highly specific and detailed factual elements in there. The jury well may have been thinking that some of those things were untrue. It doesn't mean that it was Johnny Depp then abused her. Those are two entirely separate things. And I liked this point. If anything, the jury's conclusions show the care with which the jury analyzed each of the statements and that Ms. Heard's claims were considered fairly and seriously. I agree with that and have said that in my previous videos. I think that's absolutely correct. Now, this third argument that Amber Heard's team makes is that the First Amendment won't allow a recovery for defamation by implication when the statements at issue involve public figures or matters of public concern. This is sort of a more complicated argument. Here's what Amber Heard's team is arguing, essentially. They're saying, look, this is defamation by implication. I personally think they're wrong about that. I don't think this was defamation by implication, because that would mean that the statements were true but read a certain way, looked like they were false. But in this case, the jury found that the statements were false. So I don't see how this could be defamation by implication. Nonetheless, I think what all of the parties are thinking about as they respond, including Johnny Depp's, is that defamation by implication was brought into play because Johnny Depp wasn't mentioned in the op-ed. The implication was that it was Johnny Depp. And Amber Heard is saying, look, you can't imply something like that if this is a public figure. And Johnny Depp's team is saying, that's not the law. There's no reason why a public figure can't be defamed by implication. The fourth argument that Amber Heard makes is that it was unfair for the jury to find that she defamed Johnny Depp through the title of the op-ed. The title of the op-ed was one of the most salacious claims. It accused Johnny Depp of sexual violence, which had never been any part of anything Amber Heard had said up until that time. Amber Heard says, I didn't write that op-ed title. The Washington Post added that, so I shouldn't be held responsible for that. But Johnny Depp's team's response is, look, even if she didn't write the title herself, she adopted it and she republished it. They go through the republication rule, which is the rule that if you repeat a defamatory statement, you're as liable as the first person who said it. And the reason for that is that the courts want to give people a remedy so that just because the first person says it doesn't mean it gives everybody else authorization to say it as many times as they want. And in this case, Johnny Depp's team says there was plenty of evidence that shows that Amber Heard adopted and republished this particular op-ed title. For example, she tweeted it out with a link, and the link right there in her tweet showed the title, which accused someone, now the jury believes, Johnny Depp, of sexual violence against her. The evidence, they say, showed that she didn't just retweet it, it didn't just have the title, but she actually put in new words. She added, today I published this op-ed in the Washington Post. She never disavowed the title, she adopted it. They also say that she added that the article was about women who are channeling their rage about violence and inequality into political strength despite the price of coming forward. From college campuses to Congress, we're balancing the scales. Those things amounted to a republication, is what Johnny Depp's team is saying. And then Amber Heard replied on her own tweet saying, I'm honored to announce my role as an ACLU ambassador on women's rights. Now, the fifth argument that Amber Heard made was that there was no support for a finding of actual malice against her. And Johnny Depp's team's response is, look, here's what actual malice requires. You have to have proof of knowledge or reckless disregard as to the falsity of the statements. And here they say you can prove that by circumstantial evidence. They also say that in a situation like this one, where the person who made the statement is also the person who's doing the publication, that person knows whether the statement is true or false. That's within their knowledge. Therefore, you don't really have to prove actual malice. If you prove that it's false, apparently the person knew that it was false and yet made the statement anyway. Therefore, that in and of itself is actual malice. They also talked about the evidence at trial. They talked about Johnny Depp's testimony. They talked about the testimony of his two bodyguards, Travis McGivern and Malcolm Connolly, that all three of them talked about Johnny Depp having not been aggressive with Amber Heard, and on the other side, Amber Heard having been aggressive with Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp's team also pointed to the evidence they offered at trial that some of the photographs may have been altered, some of the ones that Amber Heard was using. They also talked about the testimony from the former TMZ employee who said that they had been alerted from a reliable source that Amber Heard would have a bruise on her face that could be photographed at a particular time at the courthouse. So those things, they say, suggest that Amber Heard had actual malice. Amber Heard's argument number 6 is that Johnny Depp did not have enough evidence to support a finding of defamation by innuendo. In other words, they say, this article, the op-ed that Amber Heard wrote, didn't refer to Johnny Depp. So it's not fair to say that Johnny Depp was defamed by this article that didn't even mention him. Johnny Depp's team responds, look, it said 2 years ago. Everyone knew that 2 years ago was when you were going through a bitter divorce with Johnny Depp, and everyone knew that 2 years ago was when you saw the temporary restraining order because you said he had been violent with you. In addition, they said there was press coverage around that time. Press coverage that you, Amber Heard, encouraged. Here, Amber Heard made a really strange argument. She argued that because she had never accused Johnny Depp of SV before the op-ed was published, no one could have believed it was about Johnny Depp. That argument made no sense to me because the whole article was either about Johnny Depp or it wasn't. And that's exactly what Johnny Depp's team argues. They said you have to look at the whole publication. You can't just pull out the title and say that alone was new and different. It's in context, and the context was something that appeared to be and was referring to Johnny Depp. You have to look at the context of the publicity from 2016. You have to look at it in context of the entire article, and when you do, you can clearly see that this was about Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp's team's last argument under this section is that Johnny Depp is not arguing that he should recover for any statements Amber Heard made during a judicial proceeding, either while she was getting the TRO or while she was in the UK court. And that certainly seemed to be the case to me. I saw no evidence that Johnny Depp had put anything like that into the trial or that it was something he was trying to recover for. And that's exactly what Johnny Depp's team said. Johnny Depp did not even present any evidence of a statement Ms. Heard made in a judicial proceeding. So there you have it. That is, in a nutshell, Johnny Depp's response to Amber Heard's argument that she ought to get a new trial. Is she going to get one? Doesn't look very likely at this level. We'll have to wait for the appeal, but probably we've already seen the very best arguments that Amber Heard's got. So please be sure to like and subscribe and turn the notifications on. I expect Judge Azcarate to respond to this very quickly. As I understand it, she only has jurisdiction over the case for 21 days after she entered the judgment. That means she's going to rule on this promptly, and we're going to find out what her ruling is, whether or not Amber gets a new trial, or whether it's on to the appeal. So we'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.